The last image that most Americans have of this Capitol behind us was a violent mob attacking it to undermine democracy. But we are gathered here today as a nonviolent army of love and truth. We don't need to be an insurrection because we are a powerful resurrection. We are here today as America's and representing America's largest potential swing vote, poor and low-wage brothers and sisters who make this country work. Determined with our moral and religious, labor, social justice advocate allies, we are determined that it is time to rise up and say together it is time to climb and take this nation to higher ground. And we stand in a long tradition, brothers and sisters. We gather here today 70 years after the U.S. Supreme Court declared that segregating children by race had no place in public education. It was not so much that 9 men, white men in black robes woke up, but it was that millions of Americans, white and black, rose up. And our nation's conscience cried that it was beneath the promise of the Constitution to inflict the stigma of race, that it was beneath the call of the scriptures that declares, out of one blood God has made all people. And so responding to that cry, the court ruled that school segregation was too low down for the high ideals that we needed to rise to higher ground. We are assembled here today 59 years after Martin Luther King Jr. said the greatest fear of the greedy oligarch in this country was for the masses of black people and white people to form a voting bloc that could fundamentally shift the economic architecture of this country. And 56 years after Dr. Martin King was murdered by a spirit so poisonous that it would kill presidents, preachers, and possibility. But less than 3 months after his assassination, welfare rights women who had called for the Poor People's Campaign joined Coretta Scott King, and Coretta Scott King said to the nation that violence was far more pervasive than the murder of her husband. She said 56 years ago to a crowd gathered just like this, she said, I must remind you that starving a child is violence. Neglecting school children is violence. Punishing a mother and her family is violence. Discrimination against working people is violence. Ghetto housing is violence. Ignoring medical need is violence. And contempt for poverty is violence. And an apathetic attitude that refuses to deal with it is also violence. Ms. King joined poor people to call the nation to nonviolent moral public policy because anything less was too low down, and we needed to rise to higher ground. We agree today when we come here with Amanda Gorman, our nation's first youth poet laureate, when she wrote, we've begun the task of building a tower together, a tower not stacked with steel and stone, but heart and home. In my spirit, for the last few months, I've been singing a song, I'm pressing on the upward way. New heights I'm gaining every day, still praying as I'm onward bound. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. We come here today in a moment when too often meanness is the measure of public policy. And it is a way that is far too low down and beneath the vision of one nation under God. 135 million people, 140 million people struggling to survive with poverty and low wealth in the wealthiest nation in the history of the country is too low down for us to be satisfied. 800 people dying a day needlessly from poverty, 295,000 a year is too low down for us to be satisfied. A place 350,000 people died during COVID so far didn't die because of the virus. For us to be satisfied. When too many times people are having to choose between buying food and buying medicine, that is too low down to be satisfied. Cities where you can buy unleaded gas, but you can't buy unleaded water, that's too low down to be satisfied. A Supreme Court that says you can send somebody to jail for not having a home. You can send them to jail for sleeping. But then they turn around and say those with money can have unprecedented power in our election. That is too low down for a nation. A nation that can have an almost unanimous vote on spending more money for war and blowing up the world, but can't get a vote on healing bodies and healing broken communities and investing in poor communities and making sure people have health care in the Appalachians of the mountains of West Virginia, the deltas of Mississippi, the urban conclaves of the Bronx, and the tense territories of Tenderloin in San Francisco. Is too low down. And in this time, poor people, low-wage workers, religious leaders, and moral advocates, we join our voices today, hear us, America, to declare and commit that with protest and agitation in the street and litigation in the court and legislation in the suite and our massive swing vote in the ballot box, we will take this nation to higher ground. Now, there was a time when the watchword was woke, and rightly so. Folks said you got to get woke. Folks have awakened to the realities of systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, denial of health care, the war economy, the false moral, religious and distorted narrative of religious nationalism and Christian nationalism, and the heavy finance weaponizing of our communities and the war economy. But my tradition also says it's not just enough to get woke. When you get woke, you got to get out of bed. We understand and must do what Hoosier and Mabel Staples sang in their protest song when they said, it's not the waking, baby, it's the rising. It's the ground of the foot uncompromising. It's not the foregoing of the lie. It's not the opening of the eye. It's not the waking. It's the rising. It's not the song. It's the singing. It's the heaven of human spirit ringing. It's the bringing of the line. It's the bearing of the lie. It's not the waking. It's the rising. That's why we cry power. And we declare today it's time for a rising. Not an uprising of violence and fear, but a nonviolent rising of poor people and low-wage people and their allies that can resurrect the possibilities of this democracy. There will be no democracy worth saving if it doesn't lift the lives of poor and low-wage people all over this world. This is not a moment. Tell your neighbor it's not a moment. This is a movement that must rise until we lift this land from the nation, from the bottom, so that everybody rises. And we know that it is time out for being easily defeated and easily turned off. It's time out for listening to the talking heads rather than mobilizing the massive turnout of our swing